Save my brother! Please save my brother! Please save my brother!
Hey, it's okay. What's wrong?
Please don't go!
The
Save my
billionaire's
brother!
$2,000 Italian leather shoes stopped exactly 1 inch from a pair of worn-out, mud-stained sneakers. Kang Min-yi, Seoul's Ice King, the man who turned healthcare into a trillion-won empire, was about to walk past. His security detail was already moving to clear the path. But then 7-year-old Yoon Ha-yoon did something no board member, no investor, no politician had ever dared to do. She grabbed his sleeve. "Please save my brother." 4 words, spoken by a child clutching a backpack full of pennies outside the hospital Min-yi's company had just acquired. 4 words that would trigger a 72-hour corporate war that would shake Seoul's medical industry to its core. What this little girl didn't know was that the billionaire she was begging had spent 20 years building walls around his heart. Walls constructed from the same trauma she was living through right now. Watching someone you love die because you're too poor to matter. What the hospital director didn't know was that he had just made one fatal mistake. He had turned away the wrong child, at the wrong hospital, in front of the wrong billionaire. In 72 hours, Min-yi would buy the entire hospital, fire every administrator who valued profit over patients, uncover an embezzlement scheme that had stolen from orphan medical funds, and transform his entire corporate empire into something the business world had never seen before. But the real shock wasn't the hostile takeover. It was what Min-yi discovered about himself in the process, and what he built from the brokenness he'd been carrying for 2 decades. Here's what nobody tells you about what happens when a man who has everything realizes he has nothing. This is the story of how one little girl's bravery shattered a billionaire's carefully constructed armor in 72 hours, and how he used his vast power not for revenge, but for redemption. By the end of this, you'll understand why the Ice King of Seoul walked away from billions in profit, why a 7-year-old's backpack of pennies is now displayed in his office, and why the first time anyone ever saw Kang Min-yi smile was on a windswept soccer field with 2 orphaned children. Before we get into the transformation, and trust me, it's going to hit you right in the heart, hit that subscribe button because we're bringing you more stories of humanity winning against impossible odds, and you're not going to want to miss them. Now let's get into this. It started with 1 inch of space between 2 worlds, and it ended with a man finding his soul. 20 minutes before Ha-yoon grabbed his sleeve, Kang Min-yi was doing what he did best, turning human suffering into quarterly profits. The boardroom on the 15th floor of Seoul Grace Hospital was all glass and steel, deliberately designed so the executives wouldn't have to see the patients below. Min-yi stood at the head of the table, his presentation illuminating the faces of 12 hospital administrators who hung on his every word. "Gentlemen, the numbers are clear." His voice was smooth, controlled, completely devoid of emotion. "Our VIP patient program has increased revenue by 43% in just 6 months. Premium care for premium prices. It's simple economics." He clicked to the next slide, a graph showing profit margins rising like a fever chart. "The issue is inefficiency. We're still allocating resources to patients who can't afford optimal care packages. Emergency cases that tie up operating rooms for hours without guaranteed payment." Min-yi's finger traced the downward trend on another graph. "This is what compassion costs us." Director H. Wang, a portly man with sweat permanently beaded on his upper lip, nodded vigorously. "Mr. Kang is absolutely right. We've already implemented the deposit policy for non-emergency surgeries. No payment, no procedure." "Not far enough," Min-yi countered. He pulled up a proposal on the screen. Each line item a carefully calculated extraction of wealth from desperation. "I'm recommending we increase the minimum deposit to 50 million won for any major surgery. No exceptions, no payment plans. If they can't afford it, they can go to a public hospital." Someone shifted uncomfortably at the end of the table. Dr. Kim, one of the senior surgeons, a man whose hands had saved hundreds of lives before Min-yi's company bought the hospital. "Mr. Kang, with respect, 50 million won. That's nearly impossible for most families. We'd be turning away children, elderly patients. We'd be ensuring this hospital's survival." Min-yi's eyes were cold, flat, empty as an abandoned building. "Doctor, your job is to operate. Mine is to make sure there's a hospital for you to operate in. The market doesn't care about sob stories. Neither do I." The room fell silent. It always did when Min-yi spoke. He had that effect, the ability to make moral concerns seem like amateur mistakes, to make compassion sound like financial incompetence. "The vote," Min-yi didn't ask, he stated. 11 hands rose. Dr. Kim's remained on the table, his jaw tight, his eyes studying the billionaire as if trying to find something human beneath the tailored suit. He wouldn't find it. Minyi had made sure of that years ago. Excellent. Implementation begins Monday. Minyi closed his laptop with a decisive click. Gentlemen, we've just saved this hospital. You're welcome. He walked out of that boardroom the same way he'd walked into it. Untouched. Unmoved, certain that he'd made the only logical decision. He had 17 minutes left before everything changed. 17 minutes before a little girl with mud-stained sneakers would teach him that some things can't be calculated on a spreadsheet. Ha-Yun had been waiting outside the hospital's main entrance for 3 hours. Her backpack sat between her feet, bulging with everything she owned that had any value. She'd counted it 17 times on the bus ride here. 43,001 in coins, years of birthday money, coins found under vending machines, tips from helping the Ajama at the corner store carry groceries. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough, but it was everything. When the automatic doors slid open and Minyi emerged, flanked by his security team, Ha-Yun didn't think, she just moved. Her small hand caught the fabric of his suit jacket. Expensive material, softer than anything she'd ever touched. Please, her voice cracked. Please save my brother. Minyi stopped. Not because he cared, he told himself later, but because no one had breached his personal space in years. His head of security moved to extract her, but Minyi raised one finger. Wait. He looked down at her, really looked. 7 years old, maybe 8. Oversized sweater with a hole in the elbow. Eyes that had seen too much too soon. I have money, Ha-Yun said quickly. Desperately, she swung the backpack around, unzipped it, coins spilled onto the pristine marble, rolling in all directions. I counted it. 43,001, and I have this. She pulled out a piece of paper, carefully folded. When she opened it, Minyi saw a child's drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. Me and Junho, written in shaky Hangul at the top. He drew this before he got sick. He's really good at drawing. He could be an artist someday if someone would just. What's going on here? Director H. Wang's voice boomed across the lobby. He'd followed Minyi down, still eager to impress. When he saw the scene, the spilled coins, the desperate child, his face twisted with disgust. You again, he grabbed Ha-Yun's shoulder. Not gently. I told you this morning. No deposit, no surgery. How many times do we need to explain basic economics to you people? Ha-Yun clutched her drawing. But I brought money. H. Wang laughed, actually laughed. 40,001. The surgery costs 50 million. What do you think this is? A charity? He kicked at the scattered coins. They skittered across the floor like broken promises. This wouldn't even cover the consultation fee. He turned to Minyi, performing now. You see what we deal with, Mr. Kang. This is exactly why we need strict policies. They think tears and pocket change can pay for million-1 procedures. Minyi stood perfectly still. His face betrayed nothing, but something was happening behind those cold eyes. A crack, hairline thin, spreading through 20 years of carefully constructed ice. Because he'd seen this before. He'd lived this before. Different hospital, different child. Same desperate mathematics, where love couldn't bridge the gap between what you had and what you needed. Ha-Yun was crying now, gathering her coins with shaking hands. Please, he's all I have. He's only 9, please. Director H. Wang was still talking, still performing his cruelty for an audience of 1. He didn't notice Minyi's hand slowly reaching for his phone. He didn't notice that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Minyi made the first call before his car left the hospital parking lot. Jung-ho, his voice was quiet, controlled, but his CFO had worked with him long enough to recognize the tone. It was the voice Minyi used right before he dismantled a competitor piece by piece. I need a full financial audit of Soul Grace Hospital. Every transaction for the last 5 years. I want it on my desk in 6 hours. Sir, we just finalized the acquisition last month. The paperwork alone. 6 hours, and get me Lee Min-seo from legal. He hung up, made another call, then another. By the time his penthouse elevator doors opened, Minyi had mobilized 15 people across 4 departments. None of them asked why. They'd learned not to question him when he had that edge in his voice. His office overlooked the Han River, floor-to-ceiling windows that normally showcased his dominance over the city. Tonight, he didn't notice the view. He pulled off his jacket, loosened his tie, and opened his laptop. Soul Grace Hospital. He'd acquired it as part of a larger portfolio, 9 hospitals across Korea, all profitable, all efficiently run according to the metrics that mattered to shareholders. He'd never actually walked through the pediatric ward, never needed to. The first reports started arriving at 11 p.m. Financial statements, board meeting minutes, personnel files. Minyi consumed data the way other people consumed air, his eyes scanning thousands of pages, looking for the patterns only he could see. At 1 a.m., he found the first irregularity, a consulting fee paid to a shell company. small enough to hide in the annual budget, large enough to matter. At 3 a.m., his forensic accountant called. "Mr. Kang, you need to see this." The pattern was elegant, almost beautiful in its audacity. Director H. Wang had been skimming from the hospital's charitable fund. Donations meant for patients who couldn't pay. He'd created fake vendors, phantom medical supply companies, ghost consultants. Over 3 years, he'd stolen nearly 2 billion won, money that was supposed to save children like Junho. Minyi's jaw tightened. He kept digging. By dawn, he had everything: the embezzlement scheme, the kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies, the falsified patient records to inflate insurance claims, the board members who knew and looked the other way because they were getting their cut. At 6 a.m., his lawyer arrived with coffee and contracts. "Boss, you look terrible. When's the last time you slept?" Minyi didn't answer. He was reviewing the acquisition documents, finding the clauses he needed. Seoul Grace Hospital was part of a larger holding company. If he bought enough shares in the parent corporation, he could take control of the entire board. "How much would it cost?" Minyi asked. "To buy controlling interest. Maybe 200 billion won. But that's insane, you'd lose." "I don't care about the loss." Minyi's voice was flat. "Final, make it happen. I want majority control by Monday morning." His lawyer stared at him. "Sir, this is financial suicide. The stock is overvalued the market." "Monday morning," Minyi repeated, "and draft termination documents for every board member. I want legal grounds for each one." He looked out at the rising sun, seeing not the city, but a 7-year-old girl counting pennies. "It's time someone cleaned house." Monday morning, 7:43 a.m. Minyi walked through the main entrance of Seoul Grace Hospital like a man who owned the building, which, as of 47 minutes ago, he did. The security guard who'd pushed Ha-Yun away on Friday stepped forward, hand raised. "Sir, visiting hours don't start until..." "You're fired." Minyi didn't break stride. "Collect your final paycheck from HR by noon." The guard's face went pale. "You can't just..." "I'm Kang Minyi. As of 6:56 this morning, I own controlling interest in the parent corporation of this hospital. I can do whatever I want." He turned to the second guard. "You stood there Friday and watched a child cry. You're fired too." Behind him, his legal team followed like a disciplined army. 8 lawyers, 2 accountants, his head of security. They spread through the lobby with the precision of a surgical strike. Minyi took the stairs to the pediatric ward. He could have taken the elevator, but he needed the time to breathe, to prepare for what came next. The nurse at the pediatric station looked up. Startled, "Sir, this is a restricted..." "Yoon Junho, which room?" Something in his voice made her answer. 317. "But he's not cleared for visitors he needs." Minyi was already walking. Room 317 was at the end of the hall, the smallest room, the one they gave to patients without insurance. He pushed open the door. The boy in the bed was impossibly small. 9 years old, the file had said, but illness had stolen his childhood, leaving behind a fragile frame, and eyes too tired for someone who should still believe in superheroes. Ha-Yun sat beside him in a plastic chair, still wearing the same oversized sweater. She'd been there all weekend. The nurses had told him, hadn't left except to use the bathroom. She looked up when the door opened. Her eyes went wide. "You," she whispered. "Me." Minyi stepped into the room. Up close, he could see the medical equipment keeping Junho alive. The IV drip, the monitors tracking a heartbeat that was growing weaker by the day, every beep a countdown. "I don't have more money," Ha-Yun said quickly, desperately, "but I can work, I can clean, I can." "You don't need more money." Minyi's voice was softer than he'd intended. He pulled out his phone, pressed a number. "Dr. Kim, this is Kang Minyi. I need you in room 317. Bring your surgical team." Ha-Yun's breath caught. "What are you?" "I'm authorizing the surgery, today." Now Minyi looked at Junho, really looked at him, saw himself 20 years ago, watching his sister fade away in a room just like this one. No deposit required. But they said, what they said doesn't matter anymore. Minyi crouched down, meeting Ha-Yun at eye level. "The people who turned you away don't work here anymore. As of this morning, I make the decisions, and I'm deciding that your brother gets his surgery." Junho stirred, his eyes opening slightly. "Nuna," his voice was barely a whisper. "What's happening?" Ha-Yun grabbed her brother's hand, tears streaming down her face. "You're going to get better, Junho. You're going to get better." Minyi stood, straightening his jacket. Through the window, he could see Director H. Wang being escorted out of the building by security. The man was shouting, gesturing wildly, his face red with rage and disbelief. Minyi felt nothing watching him go. No, that wasn't true. He felt something. For the first time in 20 years, he felt like he could breathe. Director H. Wang made it as far as the lobby before his survival instincts kicked in. He'd been in corporate politics long enough to know when he was outmaneuvered. The security escorts, the lawyers in the hallway, the way the staff suddenly wouldn't meet his eyes. This wasn't a simple personnel change. This was an execution. He pulled out his phone, hands shaking with rage and fear, and dialed the number he'd used a dozen times before. The police captain who'd helped him bury complaints, smooth over incidents, make problems disappear. Captain Song, it's Director H. Wang. I need you at Seoul Grace immediately. There's a hostile corporate takeover happening. Illegal termination, possibly fraud. Director H. Wang? The voice on the other end was careful. Measured, I can't help you with this. What do you mean you can't? We have an arrangement. I've made very generous contributions to your departments. Those contributions are being audited as we speak. A pause. Do you know who Kang Min-yi is? H. Wang's blood went cold. The billionaire. So what? Money doesn't put him above the law. He doesn't need to be above the law. He owns the company that manages the Seoul Police Pension Fund. As of this morning, my retirement and the retirement of every officer in this district is in his hands. Captain Song's voice dropped. I'm sorry, Director, you're on your own. The line went dead. H. Wang stood there, phone pressed to his ear, feeling the ground dissolve beneath his feet. He dialed another number, then another. His lawyer, his contacts at City Hall, the board members who'd stood beside him in that meeting just 3 days ago. Every call ended the same way. Apologies, convenient memory loss, doors slamming shut. Director H. Wang. He turned. Min-yi stood 10 feet away, perfectly composed, not a hair out of place despite having worked through the weekend. Behind him, 2 members of his legal team held manila folders thick with documents. We need to talk, Min-yi said. In private. They moved to a conference room. H. Wang's conference room, until 40 minutes ago. Now it felt like a courtroom. Min-yi didn't sit. He opened one of the folders, spread documents across the table like evidence at a trial. 2 billion won, Min-yi said quietly. That's how much you stole from the charitable medical fund over 3 years. Money donated specifically to help patients who couldn't afford care. Patients like the little girl you laughed at on Friday. H. Wang's mouth went dry. Those are accounting errors you can't prove. I can prove all of it. Shell companies, fake vendors, ghost consultants. Your signature on every fraudulent invoice. Min-yi's eyes were empty, merciless. I have forensic accountants who live for this kind of puzzle. You weren't even careful. You can't do this. I'll fight you in court. With what lawyer, what money? Min-yi leaned forward slightly. I've frozen your accounts pending investigation. Your assets are tied up in litigation. Your professional reputation is about to be destroyed in every medical journal in Korea. He pulled out one more document, a confession already drafted. You have 2 choices. Sign this. Admit to embezzlement, and I'll ensure you only face civil charges. You'll lose everything, but you'll stay out of prison. Min-yi's voice was absolutely calm. Or refuse, and I'll pursue criminal charges. You'll lose everything anyway, but you'll do it from a cell. H. Wang stared at the paper, at his entire life crumbling in 12-point font. Why, his voice cracked. Why destroy me over one child? Min-yi's expression didn't change. Because someone should have destroyed the man who did this to me 20 years ago. Because children shouldn't die. Because adults value profit over people. He placed a pen on the table. Choose. The pediatric surgery waiting room had uncomfortable chairs, fluorescent lighting that hummed too loudly, and a coffee machine that dispensed something that barely qualified as coffee. Min-yi had never spent time in a room like this. When he needed medical care, he went to private clinics with leather sofas and espresso machines and doctors who made house calls. But Ha-yoon was here, so he was here. She sat perfectly still, her backpack on her lap, her worn sneakers not quite touching the floor. She hadn't spoken since they wheeled Jun-ho into the operating room 2 hours ago. Just sat there, staring at the double doors like she could will them to open through sheer determination. Min-yi checked his phone for the 47th time. Markets were open. His acquisition of the hospital's parent company had sent shockwaves through the healthcare sector. His board was calling. Investors were panicking. He'd just spent 200 billion won on what every analyst was calling a catastrophic decision. He should be in crisis management mode. Instead, he was sitting in a plastic chair next to a 7-year-old, drinking terrible coffee. Mr. Kang, Ha-yoon's voice was small. Uncertain, can I ask you something? Yes. Why did you help us? She looked up at him. Those eyes that had haunted him all weekend. You don't even know us. Min-yi was quiet for a long moment. He could give her the corporate answer. Something about ethics and responsibility. He could deflect, change the subject. Instead, he told her the truth. I had a sister. Her name was Min-jae. The words felt rusty, unused. He hadn't spoken about her in 15 years. She was 9 when she got sick, same age as Junho. Ha-Yun waited, patient in the way children are when they sense something important. We didn't have money for the treatment she needed. My parents begged, just like you begged. They brought everything we owned to the hospital. It wasn't enough. Minyi stared at the double doors. She died 3 weeks later. I was 12 years old. I'm sorry, Ha-Yun whispered. I promised myself that day that I'd never be powerless again. Never be the person who couldn't afford to save someone I loved. He looked at his hands, manicured and empty. I spent 20 years building an empire, making money, accumulating power. I thought that's what mattered. But you saved Junho, Ha-Yun said. You have the power now. Yes, Minyi felt something crack in his chest. That hairline fracture spreading wider. But all that power, all that money, it didn't make me happy. It just made me cold. Ha-Yun reached over and took his hand. Her small fingers wrapped around his, warm and trusting, and completely unafraid. You're not cold, she said simply. Cold people don't sit in waiting rooms. Minyi looked down at their joined hands. Hers were rough, calloused from work a 7-year-old shouldn't have to do. His were soft, pampered, untouched by real struggle for 2 decades. And yet somehow she was stronger than him. She had nothing, no money, no power, no safety net, just hope, pure, unshakable hope that her brother would survive, that good things could still happen, that the world wasn't entirely broken. Minyi had spent billions trying to insulate himself from pain. She'd spent 43,000 won in coins, and every ounce of courage she had. He knew which one of them was richer. The surgery doors opened. Dr. Kim emerged, pulling down his mask and the expression on his face. Ha-Yun squeezed Minyi's hand tighter. For the first time in 20 years, Minyi closed his eyes and hoped. Dr. Kim was smiling. That's what Minyi noticed first. After 20 years of board meetings and business deals, he'd learned to read faces, to see the truth behind professional masks. Dr. Kim was smiling. The surgery was successful, the doctor said, and Ha-Yun made a sound, half sob, half laugh that shattered something in Minyi's carefully reconstructed walls. Junho is strong. He'll need recovery time, but he's going to be fine. Ha-Yun buried her face in Minyi's jacket, her small body shaking with relief. He put his hand on her head, awkward but genuine, and let her cry. But Minyi wasn't in the waiting room anymore. He was 12 years old again, sitting in a different hospital, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit because they were hand-me-downs from a cousin. His mother was crying, but not with relief. His father sat with his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. The doctor then hadn't been smiling. I'm sorry, that doctor had said, 20 years ago. We did everything we could within the parameters available. Parameters, such a clean word for. Your daughter died because you're poor. Minjai had been 9. She loved drawing, just like Junho. She'd filled notebooks with sketches of birds and flowers and the family she imagined they'd be someday, happy, together, safe. The last thing she'd drawn was a picture of young Minyi. He still had it, hidden in a locked drawer in his penthouse. Too painful to look at, but impossible to throw away. In the drawing, he was wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase, standing in front of a tall building. Opa will be rich someday, she'd whispered in the hospital bed. Then you can save everyone. But he'd been too late to save her.
Everything will be fine.
The deposit had been
Okay.
30 million
Take care of
won.
yourself.
His parents
I
had
will.
brought
Thank
everything.
you.
12 million in savings.
Gentlemen, we've
jewelry,
just saved
even
this
the
hospital.
deed to their
You're
tiny
welcome.
apartment. The hospital had been sympathetic but firm. Rules
Save my
were
brother,
rules.
please save my
Policies
brother.
were policies.
Please
Minjai
save
had
me,
3
Dad.
weeks of palliative care. Then she was gone.
Excellent.
Minyi had
Implementation
stood at her
begins
funeral
Monday.
and made a promise. He would become exactly what that hospital drawing imagined. Rich, powerful, untouchable. No one would ever tell him not enough again. He'd kept that promise. Built an empire from rage and grief and relentless determination. Made his first million at 23. First billion at 28. By 30, he was the man his sister had imagined. But he'd become something else too. Hard, cold, efficient. He'd built walls so high that nothing could hurt him, not realizing that nothing could reach him either. He'd saved himself from ever feeling that powerless again. He'd also stopped feeling anything at all. Until Friday. Until a 7-year-old girl with 43,000 won had grabbed his sleeve and asked him to be human again. Mr. Kang, Dr. Kim was looking at him with concern. Are you all right? Minyi realized his vision was blurred. He blinked and something wet tracked down his cheek. He was crying. For the first time since Minjai's funeral, he was crying. I'm fine, he managed. When can we see him? He's in recovery now. Give him another hour. Ha-Yun looked up at Minyi, her eyes red but shining. Thank you so much. Minyi crouched down, meeting her at eye level. Your brother is going to be okay, and I'm going to make sure this never happens to another child. That's my promise to you. To you, he thought, and to Minjai, and to the 12-year-old boy I used to be. He couldn't rewrite history, couldn't bring his sister back, But maybe, finally, he could write a different ending for someone else's story. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was enough. The emergency board meeting was called for Wednesday morning, 72 hours after Ha-Yun had grabbed Min-Yi's sleeve. The new board, handpicked by Min-Yi after he'd cleaned house, sat around the conference table with expressions ranging from confused to concerned. His CFO looked like he hadn't slept. His head investor kept checking his phone as the stock price tumbled in real time. Min-Yi stood at the head of the table, the same position he'd occupied Friday when he'd argued for maximizing profits. But the man standing there now was different. "Gentlemen, I've called you here to announce a restructuring of Soul Grace Hospital's operational model." He pulled up a presentation, but this time the slides didn't show profit margins or revenue projections. Effective immediately, Soul Grace will transition to a non-profit healthcare foundation. The room erupted. "That's financial suicide. Our shareholders will revolt. Mr. Kang, you've lost 200 billion won in 3 days. We can't afford." Min-Yi raised his hand. Silence fell, but it was uneasy, fragile. "I'm aware of the financial implications. I've run the numbers." He clicked to the next slide. "Here's what we're going to do. All profits above operational costs will be redirected to a medical assistance fund. No patient will be turned away because they can't afford care. No child will watch their family beg for deposits they can't pay." His CFO stood up. "Sir, with all respect, this is insanity. We're a business, not a charity. The market has already reacted. We've lost 18% of our share value since Monday. If we do this, we'll lose everything." "Not everything." Min-Yi's voice was calm. "Certain, we'll lose money. We'll lose investors who only care about returns. But we'll gain something worth more than quarterly profits." "What could possibly be worth?" "Our humanity." Min-Yi looked around the table. "I built this company on the idea that healthcare is a commodity, that human lives have price tags, that efficiency matters more than compassion." He paused. "I was wrong." Dr. Kim, the only doctor at the table, was nodding slowly. "This hospital will become a model." Min-Yi continued. "Other facilities in our network will follow. We'll still be sustainable, still pay competitive salaries, still maintain excellence, but our primary metric will no longer be profit. It will be lives saved, families kept whole, children who get to grow up. The shareholders will sue," someone muttered. "Let them. I have controlling interest. They can divest if they disagree with the direction." Min-Yi clicked to the final slide, a photo of Ha-Yun and Junho, taken yesterday in the recovery room. The boy was pale but smiling. The girl was holding his hand. "This is why we're doing this. Not for the numbers, for them." His phone was buzzing, probably his investors, his lawyers, his entire corporate network trying to talk him down from what they saw as professional suicide. He silenced it. "I started this company 20 years ago because I never wanted to feel powerless again." Min-Yi said quietly, "But power without purpose is just emptiness. Wealth without compassion is just numbers on a screen." He looked at each board member. "I've spent 2 decades accumulating both. Now I'm going to use them for something that actually matters." The CFO was shaking his head. "You'll lose billions. Your reputation in the business world will change." "Good." Min-Yi closed his laptop. "Meeting adjourned. Implementation begins today." He walked out while they were still arguing, and for the first time since he'd built his empire, he didn't care about the chaos he'd left behind. 6 months later, the field behind Soul Grace Hospital had been empty for years, just overgrown grass and weeds that no one bothered to maintain. Min-Yi had it cleared, leveled, and turned into a proper soccer pitch. Not for publicity, not for tax benefits, just because Junho had mentioned once that he used to love playing soccer before he got sick. "Are you ready?" Junho called out, bouncing on his toes. 6 months of recovery, physical therapy, and proper nutrition had transformed him. He still tired easily, still had checkups every week, but the color had returned to his cheeks. The light had returned to his eyes. Min-Yi stood in the makeshift goal, his suit jacket draped over the fence, his tie loosened, his usually perfect hair disheveled by the wind. His assistant had called 3 times. The markets were volatile. There were decisions to be made. He'd ignored all 3 calls. "I'm ready," he said, "but go easy on me, I'm old." "You're not old," Ha-Yun laughed from the sideline. She was wearing her school uniform, the new one Min-Yi had quietly arranged for, though he'd been careful not to make her feel like charity. "You're just out of practice." Junho grinned, that beautiful, mischievous grin that kids who have faced death and one seemed to carry, and kicked the ball. Min-Yi dove missed. The ball sailed past him into the net. "Goal!" Junho threw his arms up, spinning in a circle. "Did you see that, Nuna? Did you see?" "I saw amazing." Ha-yun was jumping up and down, clapping. Min-yi picked himself up off the grass, brushing dirt from his expensive trousers. His board would be horrified. The Ice King of Seoul, playing in the dirt like a child. He couldn't remember the last time he'd smiled this wide. Okay, best 2 out of 3, he said, positioning himself back in the goal. They played until the sun started setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Min-yi lost every round, whether on purpose or because he was genuinely terrible at soccer. Even he wasn't entirely sure. Finally, exhausted, they collapsed on the grass. Junho lay between Min-yi and Ha-yun, staring up at the clouds. Mr. Kang, Junho's voice was thoughtful. Why did you really help us? Min-yi was quiet for a moment, watching the clouds drift across the sky. Because someone I loved needed help once, and I couldn't give it to her. So when I saw your sister, I saw a chance to do what I couldn't do before. Did it work? Junho asked. Did it make you feel better? Min-yi thought about the last 6 months, the restructured hospitals, the medical assistance fund that had already helped 300 families, the letters he received every week from parents whose children were alive because of policies that prioritized people over profit. He thought about the stock portfolios he'd lost, the investors who'd abandoned him, the business associates who now called him naive. He thought about the way Ha-yun hugged him every time he visited, the drawings Junho made for his office, the way he slept through the night now, without dreams of his sister's hospital room. Yes, he said simply, it did. Ha-yun rolled onto her side, propping herself up on her elbow. My teacher says you're famous now, that you changed how hospitals work. Maybe a little. She says you're a hero. Min-yi shook his head. I'm not a hero. Heroes don't wait 20 years to do the right thing. But you did it, Junho said. That's what matters, right? Out of the mouths of children, Min-yi thought. His phone buzzed again. Another crisis. Another decision. Another number that needed his attention. He turned it off. Come on, he said, standing up and offering his hands to pull both kids to their feet. One more round, and this time I'm actually going to try. They played until the stars came out. 3 figures on a windswept field, laughing like the world wasn't watching, like profit margins didn't exist, like all that mattered was this moment, this joy, this second chance at being human. And maybe, Min-yi thought as Junho scored his final goal of the evening. That's exactly all that mattered. Have you ever walked past someone who needed help and convinced yourself it wasn't your responsibility? Have you ever built walls so high to protect yourself from pain that you forgot what it felt like to be human? Min-yi did, for 20 years. He chose efficiency over empathy, profit over people, until a 7-year-old girl with 43,000 won in coins reminded him what he'd lost. Here's what nobody tells you about transformation. It doesn't happen in boardrooms or on balance sheets. It happens in waiting rooms and on soccer fields. It happens when you finally stop running from your past and start using it to build a different future. Subscribe, because next week we're bringing you the story of Dr. Kim, the surgeon who refused to raise his hand in that board meeting, and how his quiet resistance inspired an entire movement of medical professionals who chose patience over politics. You're not going to want to miss that. Until then, remember this. Your worth isn't measured by what's in your bank account. Your life has value that can't be calculated on a spreadsheet. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is grab someone's sleeve and refuse to let go until they see you as human. Min-yi couldn't save his sister, but he saved Junho. And in saving that one boy, he saved himself. That's the real return on investment.